Good evening, folks. I hope you're all well. Tonight I'm going to do another reading from Nina Roudnikova's The Solar Way. It's going to be the Chariot tonight, the seventh of the major arcana. But before I get into that, I just wanted to give a plug to my friend Sam's book. He's done an absolutely wonderful job of uncovering Alois Mailander for the Rosicrucian community. This isn't somebody I'm really very familiar with, although I'm aware that Sam's been researching it for a very long time with the help of some other friends from his Pansoffers website. And I've really enjoyed reading it so far. I've not finished it yet, so I'm not really in a position to give a full critique, but I highly recommend people get hold of this book because it's a real spiritual treasure about a true hidden Rosicrucian master, Alois Mailander. And at the end of my reading from Nina Roudnikova, I think I'll share one of Mailander's sayings for us all, so that's a little treat for the end. But first, I'll just move these books. The Chariot. Arcanum 7. Okay. The Chariot of the Victor. The domination of the spirit over the form. The victory of the subtle over the dense. Astrological correspondence Gemini. Numeric designation 7. It also relates to ownership rights, apparently, in a more mundane translation. The right choice of ways, the choice of affirming subjectivity and self-affirmation in the spirit, leads not only to the domination of form, that is, the subjective nature of freedom from the world of forms, and the possibility of redistributing elements both in one's personality and in the environment, but also the possibility of creating new formations, new objective forms, for the manifestation of the possibilities of the cosmic spirit. This is no longer a simple domination, but a dominion over two streams of life in the universe. This dominion over the spirals of evolution and involution is destined to the one who correctly chose the path of the domination of the spirit over the form, that is, the subject over the object. This state of consciousness, with all the hidden knowledge of the ways and creative power over the elements of the world, is symbolically depicted in the picture of the seventh Arcanum. On a chariot under a canopy in the shape of a pentagram stands the victor, dressed in an armour made of fish scales. On his head is a seven-pointed crown with 3 pentagrams. The chariot is harnessed by 2 sphinxes, black and white, with human faces facing each other. In the rims of the chariot, instead of nails, there are eyes looking in all directions. The victor holds the reins in his left hand and raises a trident with his right, symbolising the 3 fires of the mysterious sign Shin. The domination of the spirit over the form, that is, the affirmation of one's I in the spiritual core, is actually an aspiration by one's consciousness to the eternal, unchangeable subject, to the inexpressible, to the deity, to the source of love, which fills the entire cosmos with its creativity. And since the possibilities of the subject, the divine principle of the cosmic essence, are inexhaustible, the assertion of its dominance over the objective expression in the form establishes the principle of the infinity of evolution. The world is not a closed system, as it would be if there was a balance of subjective and objective principles. The spiritual possibilities of the world are inexhaustible, and therefore there is no repetition in it. The energy flow that comes from the spirit, creating the forms of the world in an inverted triangle, returns to its source in a straight triangle and does not bring the process of the universe to rest, but excites the radiation of new possibilities in it. And since this return of the worlds to a new state and the exploration of new opportunities lasts continuously and occurs constantly in the cosmos, new worlds, new systems always arise, embodying more and more new self-emanations of the deity. It can be stated that there is no return to the past, but there is no repeatability of the process anywhere. The worlds that have completed their evolution do not return again, but new carriers of unprecedented self-disclosures of the spirit appear instead of them. Therefore, the creativity of the cosmos is never finished and strives forward in eternal evolution into the infinity of creative possibilities. Therefore, the triangles are not really equal, but only similar, because the creative potential is exhausted by the flow of evolution. But the flow of evolution is not exhausted, awakening to self-manifestation more and more, new emanations of the subjective spirit. Similarly to this cosmic process, the boundlessness of evolution in the human spirit is affirmed. Rooted in the eternal and unchangeable, it draws ever new opportunities from its boundless treasury, creates ever new opportunities for self-manifestation, finds ever new tasks, and, accordingly, consciously creates new and new personalities for himself. 6 days of creation, 6 zones, the 6 Elohim, symbolized by the hexagram of the 6th principle, never leads to peace, because the 7th day, the day of rest, the day of self-immersion in its spiritual source, again enriches it with creative possibilities. That is why this day is so important for an earthly person, dedicated to rest from objective activity, dedicated to prayer, which in fact should be a deep self-immersion of the subjective consciousness into its spiritual source. Now, I just had an impulse when I said the word prayer that I should choose something now from Mailander for you. I'm not an expert in this teaching, but apparently Mailander would give spiritual aphorisms to his students and disciples for them to think about. So the first one that I've just opened this book randomly, number 180. Purity is innocence. Only one who can sacrifice himself lives in purity. Remember that Arcanum 12 represents a sacrifice and the soul of the Messiah. Purity. Very important to remember the principle of purity when considering the 7th Arcanum, the Chariot. In the cosmic cooperation of the kingdom of God, the consciousness of every servant, of every great radiating spirit, is always strengthened in the eternal subject. This is the immutable and true equality of all the sons of God, the creators of world systems, the helpers of the one creator of the universal mind. At the same time, each of them is at his special post and performs his special tasks according to the specific colouring of his initiative potential, that is, the embodied aspect of the creative mind. The rooting of consciousness in the eternal will reveals the possibility of boundless creativity and the infusion of new possibilities into the worlds and systems controlled and created by them. Therefore, just like the entire cosmos, each part is in a state of boundless evolution in it, joyfully and freely expressing all new spiritual outflows in its specific prism. The cosmic hierarchy is not a ladder of subordination and domination, but an equal cooperation of creative consciousnesses occupying different positions and places, and the fulfillment of their specific tasks. It does not interfere, but only helps the constant and boundless subjective self-disclosure, their enrichment and affirmation. The emergence of world systems with all the forms of consciousness inhabiting them depends on the initiative of these consciousnesses, these great white cosmic brothers of humanity. The terms of the existence of these worlds depend on them. They hold the threads of their destinies in their hands. From the order and all forms of space construction depend on them. The subjective rooting of consciousness in the eternal gives them power over the involutive and evolutionary flows, that is, power over innumerable cell transformations and the power of new formations in the environment. According to the quaternary law of world dynamics, they can create for themselves any personalities, and even several, acting in different places to carry out the tasks set by themselves. Owning the continuous flow of cycles of world energy according to the same quaternary law, these great cosmic brothers, by their thought creation, realize all new pictures of conscious worlds in the flow of life. For the sake of the common good, having the possibility of a comprehensive creative manifestation of the spiritual precepts of love and life, they hold the reins of involution and evolution in their hands. The consciousness is moving in the stream, that is, the spirits of cosmic nature, thickening and discharging its energy flow in different degrees of vibrations, are not in a struggle, but in the cooperation of these two world principles, reflected on all planes of creative manifestation, and always looking into each other's eyes, with understanding and awareness, like two sphinxes in front of a chariot in the picture of the seventh Arcanum. The victor is dressed in a shell made of fish scales, that is, he is dressed in all the creative forces of space. The fish in the symbols of all peoples is a sign of a citizen of the cosmos. So it was the symbol of the ancient Christian, for Christ introduced his followers into the kingdom of God and confirmed them as citizens of the cosmos. And the earthly man who has chosen the path of spiritual evolution of the white triangle of fire, spirit, and good, thereby chooses the path of this boundless evolution, solemnly dragging him on the chariot of a recreated personality along the paths of the world infinity. The path of the soul along the white triangle, that is, the final choice of good over evil, is actually the choice of cleansing the immortal and infinite in its possibilities, the spiritual core of consciousness from its small and narrow self-identification with the imposed objectivity, that is, freeing oneself from passions, whims, egoism, impulsive reactions aroused by this egoism, which entails an ever deeper understanding and perception, expands the range of connections, the personality itself, and makes it possible for the eternal, all-encompassing and all-knowing spirit to shine in it. But having overcome the involutive current in itself in its earthly aspect of illegal confluence, which has acquired the form of evil, the next task of man is to dominate the evolutionary current, the so-called good, which in fact is only a method and a way of returning to the kingdom of God. Therefore, a person does not have to be proud of his goodness and to boast of his good thoughts, feelings, and actions. After all, by the manifestation of their positive qualities, which in their synthesis are reduced to the principle of selflessness in its various manifestations, a person only helps himself, and it is unfair to expect a reward for this. On the contrary, one should be grateful to those towards whom one is able to show one's good qualities or overcome evil ones, because only in this way can one turn one's personality into a pure vessel for the spirit, free one's consciousness from the bondage of earthly nature, and enter the kingdom of God victoriously. Unselfishness is not a merit, but only the right path, which itself carries a reward and therefore does not need any reward. Overcoming evil and dominating the involutive current is the first stage. The second stage is the overcoming of good and dominating it, which is even more difficult in the conditions of human development. This means not to surrender to the evolutionary flow, not to identify with the joy of its achievements, but to consciously apply it in the name of fulfilling duty. The conscious application of good is the knowledge of the moments and circumstances in which one or another facet of good should be applied in action, and the power over one's personal psychological composition in the application of a particular ethical principle of good. Not to be carried away by virtue, not to seek it not only for the sake of rewards, but even for its own sake, means to rule over good, and to consciously apply virtues in the name of fulfilling duty means to rule over them. The consciousness, rooted in its eternal essence, is not connected with what we usually understand by the word duty, that is, unconditional submission to a circumstance imposed by objective conditions. The victor over evil and good, who himself has rooted his consciousness in the spiritual core, is free. Guided only by his conscience and the immutable knowledge of his next task, he creates a form of fulfillment of this task, creates a plan of his duty to realize the universal good, the deployment of spirit-making. And by doing this, he is the winner over his karma, that is, over the objectivity that binds his activities over the environment. He carries all his karma within himself, since its inner spring is the axis of the fulfillment of his spiritual tasks. The new cosmic currents created by him overcome the old, inveterate ones, refining and dissolving them and making them tools for the expedient construction of spiritual tasks. The winner over himself, the master over the subjective streams of good and evil, subordinates both these streams to himself and in the surrounding world, harnesses them to the chariot of his boundless evolution, and forces them to cooperate to fulfill their tasks, owning all the secrets of their relationships and interactions. Truly, only the victor over both directions, who equally owns the secrets of both, sees the innermost springs of both, understands how both of them serve to build the common good, how joyfully they affirm the good, the rule of the spirit, and how evil, through suffering and the possibility of self-determination, contributes to the growth of the human soul. For the victor, good and evil lose their earthly ethical colouring, because the seal of the fall has been erased from his soul, and he sees only two similar creative currents, justified by life, causality, and expediency. Involution and devolution are equally necessary for the approval of cosmic construction, and their existence in terrestrial conditions is just as legitimate as in other parts of the cosmos. The victor over karma has the power of conscious incarnations and consciously creates his personalities from earthly material in the name of realizing his spiritual tasks. The winner of karma feels just as good on earth as in any other part of the cosmos. Having rooted his consciousness in the eternal, he cannot be identified with anything transitory, and therefore with the instrument of his manifestation, a person, and therefore he stands above joys and sorrows, not renouncing them, but accepting them figuratively as tools for carrying out spiritual tasks. In addition, being the master of all transitory things, he can constantly renew and regenerate the material of his personality, which ensures its immortality and the continuation of life in one body for as long as is necessary, without changes in the incarnation. The mystery of eternal life and eternal youth belongs to the victor over the transitory. The victor has an immortal soul that dominates his changing part. 3 permanent subjective principles constitute the immortal principle of the earthly man, and only this immortal soul is preserved after the death of the body, as if it returns to itself from the earthly journey and reincarnates into the next person in the body. These are the 3 components of the immortal soul. The spiritual core, immersed in its roots in the unchangeable cosmic spirit, in the absolute, in bliss. In Vedanta, this principle is called Atman. This spark of divinity, inseparable from the entire fiery ocean, sparkles in the individual human consciousness. The Atman, or spiritual core, is omniscient, and all cognition is only a self-purification and self-expansion of consciousness, so that it can manifest itself in the omniscience of the spirit eternally established in it and eternally residing in it. Because everything that we are and we know, everything that we are and we know that it actually opens a valve for what is always present in us, and we value the information we have acquired only insofar as this valve opens. This spirit is all blissful, and what we call happiness and joy is only the creation of conditions in which the screen that covers it opens, and its ray penetrate through all the vehicles, activating their activity, that is, creating what we call cheerfulness. The reality of such perceptions creates for us the true knowledge contained in the spirit. The spirit is all free, and all our longing for freedom and all our sensations of it are only vague presentiments of our creative self-disclosure. In the spiritual core of consciousness, all the possibilities of spiritual radiation are stored, which are expressed by creative impulses. 2. The heart is what is called buddhi in Vedanta, the root of our soul. This is our consciousness, which is possible only if there is a perception of objectivity. Our soul is eternally connected and united with the souls of all beings of the cosmos, constantly ready for self-forgetful help. Our soul, or our consciousness, has the constant property of recognizing between truth and falsehood, between the eternal and the transitory, and in transitory forms they seek life. Our soul is a reflection of the spiritual core in an ever-changing life, which makes all our manifestations plastic, changeable, always striving forward. Our soul is a vessel with a spiritual core, a cup filled with the Spirit and pouring out its light on all the phenomena of the world. All our unselfish feelings and the best impulses of the heart are the voice of the speaking soul. Our conscience is a reflection of its discerning ability, and the whole world of our attachments, sympathies, and mutual understanding is only a partial statement of its connection with everything that exists of its love, directed at everything. Each illumination of consciousness is the radiation of its direct perception of the Spirit, and is directed at the reality of such perceptions, creating for us the true knowledge contained in the Spirit. The mind, the big manas, in the terminology of Vedanta, is the creative intellect with its ability to abstract thinking, and the creation of concentrated thought images from thought waves, the creativity of ideas that control the life of peoples and the planet. All this is the nature of the creative part of our soul, the individual prism of the universal creative mind. Every true creativity is actually an expression of the mind's thought creation. Only ideological creativity can be called real creativity. Everything else is not creativity, but only the application of created ideas to different materials. Every abstract idea, every synthetic mental education that arises in the waves of our thinking is an expression of the activity of the mind. Every influence that we exert on the people around us and on nature is an influence on the creative mind. Every idea saturated with life, which directs both its own and someone else's thinking in a different direction, is an echo of the activity of the creative mind. His influence is so great, his creativity is so diverse, and the possibilities for the realization of this creativity are so numerous and unexpected that we cannot take into account our consciousness, narrowed by earthly karma, on which our creative thoughts are realized to the star, if the earthly conditions are not suitable for their implementation. We cannot take into account where the created representation will find a consonantly reacting receiver, and a person of another race in a completely different part of the world can realize the idea that we carry unfulfilled in ourselves. These three great principles, the top three eternally divine and immortal, always radiantly proactive, are the individual spiritual part of man and every other being in the cosmos. Its purity from everything extraneous, stuck from the outside world, guarantees as a result of its purity phenomena are the continuity of consciousness and dominion over all laws and all processes of the world. These are the three flames of the mysterious sign Shin, whose symbol in the form of a trident was raised in his hand by the winner. Everything else is just the shells of the form created by these three principles for the sake of resistance. Only these three are not subject to karma, because the dynamic law that creates the karma of the world flows from the mind as an expression of its inner nature. He is the Lord of the world, who recognizes himself as a carrier of the karma of the worlds, because his consciousness recognizes and asserts all responsibility. The one who has contained not only his karma, but also the karma of the cosmos, is its master, the master of absolutely every form, who is not afraid of anything and does not rejoice in anything. These three principles form three planes of manifestation of consciousness in the universe: the spiritual world and the intellectual world with the corresponding energy formations, with the consciousnesses inhabiting them and working in them. The following four principles are the instruments of the manifestation of the three higher ones through the third principle of the creative mind. These four lower principles formalize the creativity of the higher worlds and unfold the forming activity of the mind according to the great quaternary law of world dynamics, the general formula of which they express. When applied to a person, these four principles are embodied in his earthly personality, which is an instrument of the manifestation of his individuality on earth, that is, the totality of the three higher principles. The first of these four principles of personality is the so-called small manas, the earthly intellect or reason, the organ of recognizing the earthly situation, the speculative mind, combining earthly elements and combinations suitable for the embodiment in the thought creation of the great mind. Of course, these vessels of earthly intellectual formulations created by a small mind only partially fit the great ideas and thought creation of a large intellect associated with all cosmic creativity. That is why no earthly thought satisfies. That is why the longing of creators who are not able to express their creative potential entirely in one formula. A tool of small intelligence, language expressing thoughts in its own words, always reduces their range and reduces the depth of their content. And only gradually developing over time, the thought creation of a large mind can be embodied in numerous mental combinations of a small intellect. From the energy thought waves of small intelligence that form the intellectual sphere of the earth, the mental shells or the mental body of the earthly human personality are born. The more the earthly reason is subordinated to our great reason, the more it expresses the ideals stored in the latter, the more clearly, vividly and powerfully the mental body of the individual, and the more powerfully it fertilizes its earthly thought creation. A truly intelligent person is not the one who has accumulated information about earthly relations in the mental body of his personality, but the one who has sanctified these earthly cliches with the influence of the creativity of the higher mind. Therefore, idealists, even if they take very little account of earthly conditions, are always smarter than practical materialists who are able to combine earthly relations and are devoid of thought-creating abilities. The latter do not see either the past or the future of ideological creativity, and are limited only to an arbitrarily captured narrow link of the current moment. Of course, a harmonious combination of large and small reason is correct, and every idealism should be, at the same time, practical, that is, take into account the conditions of its manifestation, but not reconcile with these conditions, but, on the contrary, process the conditions according to its goals. The great manas must always assert its dominance over the earthly reason and use it as a tool and analyzer, without at all reducing the requirements of its ideals in favour of so-called practicality. The mental sphere of the earth is inhabited by intellectual pictures of the creativity of the human mind. The streams of his energy in various teachings flow through the receivers of personalities and are formed by the mental bodies of the latter into new theoretical formations, the value of which depends on the quality of the mental body, that is, ultimately, on its connection with the intellectual creativity of the big mind. The small mental body is a reflection of our large mental essence, which always remains the organ of the manifestation of our soul in whatever part of the cosmos the soul is embodied. Just one moment, I need to reply to a message. Okay. No. I'm back again. The second principle of personality, the psychic principle, reflects the life and activity of the heart principle, applying it to the earthly situation. In our personality, he creates an astral body, a carrier of feelings responsible for the direct perception of the energies of earthly objectivity. This astral energy builds the psychic worlds of the earth, in which all the flows of its specific impulses flow around the axis of individual consciousness, and highlights them with the life of the heart, thus building in this way the earthly relations between themselves and between the earthly nature and themselves. The astral world is inhabited by energy formations created and imbued with the psychic power of our personalities. Pictures and representations of our perception are carried in its atmosphere. Personified images live, that is, formed by the feelings and passions of our hearts, clothed in earthly shells. By the power of a small intellect, all these mental images receive formulations or bodies and live their own lives, affecting in turn the psyche of our personalities. The more our earthly feeling is illuminated by the life of our conscious soul, our great heart connected with the entire cosmos, the greater the psychic energy of our astral, the purer and more beautiful the astral body of the personality that reflects the soul. Its direct perception, intuitive realization, self-control, a sense of connection and empathy for everything that exists. In the shells of earthly feelings, our soul is expressed in all forms of earthly love, in sympathy for everything that exists on earth, in compassion and readiness to help. But if the perception of earthly objectivity prevails over the reflection of the soul, then the earthly feeling is expressed in passion, instincts and unconscious psychic impulses that bring the personality closer to the animal state, creating a corresponding form created by people in the Earth's atmosphere. All external events are reflected in the astral atmosphere of the Earth. It is like a cinematographic tape that captures every manifestation of earthly life. There we will find the true reflection of all the impulses of our personalities. There our true psychic faces are outlined with immutable clarity, for even the suppressed and hidden feelings and impulses of the earthly astral bodies create their vibrations there. So I think the cliche, be careful what you ask for because you might get it, literally rings true there. The third principle, the principle of prana or life force, is the principle of the creative form, the tangible and visible form of earthly life, that is, it is the principle that finally objectifies the creative impulse of the personality, in which our senses of external perception are potentially collapsed and develop in time. The 5 sense organs that then act in the physical body, and other organs of perception of specific earthly conditions that are not developed in it. The etheric body determines the reserve of the vital force of our personality, and thus the term of its earthly existence. The etheric body of the personality is fed from the reserves of prana of the earth, forming an etheric environment of its vital force around a person, which determines the duration of his existence and the stages of his physical development. The etheric body of the earth contains all the stages of its evolution, all the characteristic differences of its nature and the timing of its changes. Similarly, the etheric body of a human being expresses all the stages of his physical development from birth to death. The situation is recorded there the whole picture of his physical existence due to his karma, the full potential of his health, as well as the beginnings of his diseases. The fourth principle of the personality, its physical body, is the final stage of the materialization and objectification of everything previous. In the material plane, the general form of life on the planet with all the possibilities contained in this form is turned over in time. Thus this physical form unfolds in the objective world all the subjective spiritual potential expressed by this divine possibility. The physical world is an objective mirror that reflects the spiritual principle and unfolds the spiritual creativity that has passed through all the previous stages into a complete picture of the potential possibilities realized in space and time. Thus, the physical cosmos is a reflection of God, a mirror in which He looks. The physical body of the Earth, our planet, in the totality of its historical and geological development, is a reflection and expression of the physical essence of the Earth, that is, the individual potential of its spiritual representative, humanity. The physical body of a person bears the seal of the fulfillment of a spiritual task and the imprints of all his other bodies. That is why the facial features and the structure of the body can be concluded about the character and level of consciousness of a person. The body is the temple of the spirit, namely the body, because it should be the final expression or vessel of our divine essence, its carrier and manifestation. A sin against the body is, strictly speaking, a sin against the soul, the spirit, because it interferes with its manifestation. Therefore, we are obliged to protect our body, its health, its balance, its beauty, and its longevity, because in it we can work for the common good of earthly construction. Only in it we can fulfill our earthly tasks. The sin against the body is threefold. The body often comes out of the subordination of the spirit, with the help of guides, but as an independent formation it does not matter and loses the meaning of its existence. Excessive pampering of the body coarsens the organs of its perception and makes it unable to perform spiritual tasks. Therefore, discipline of the body is necessary. People with a distorted lower mental and promiscuity of the astral body exhaust the physical body with passions and lusts, exhaust the reserve of its vital force, that is, its etheric sub-base, instead of using these forces for the creation of spiritual values. That's the second sin against the body. The earthly force is gathered in the etheric body, with which the physical body is closely connected, and of which it is the expression. And we are obliged to use this earthly power, which is received only in the incarnate state, for the creation of earthly spiritual values, and not at all for the egoistic experiences of a perverted astral conductor. By this sin of wasting the life force accumulated in the body, we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to fulfill our task and stretch its fulfillment by many incarnations. The meaning of taking care of the constant replenishment of the physical body with the earthly life force is that, given a larger supply of it and a longer duration of physical life, we will be able to perform several tasks in the second incarnation. Another sin, the third, is asceticism, which is an exaggeration of the expedient and rational discipline of the body. Asceticism is based on hatred and contempt for the body, but since the body is the temple of the spirit, asceticism shows a deep misunderstanding of the task of earthly incarnation. Asceticism forces a person to prematurely break away from the forces of the earth, not using them thereby for the implementation of earthly tasks, but forcibly suppressing and destroying this earthly natural potential. Moderation, reasonable discipline, and respect for the earthly forces accumulated in the body according to our own pure and legitimate way, that's what we should do in relation to our body. These 7 principles reflected in each cycle of the manifestation of the quaternary law of dynamics are called secondary principles that form, that is, create the forms that inhabit these cycles and are opposed to the primary causalities, that is, the triangle of the upper principles, which in their unreflected form are the primary causes of every quaternary manifestation. The 4 is the number of the form, but this form also reflects the 3, and together with it creates 7 forms of manifestation of consciousness in every cycle of creation. That is why the 7 determines every objective manifestation and underlies it. In all cosmic systems, there are these 7 forms of consciousness that manifest in the 4 worlds, that is, on the 4 planes of consciousness. Similarly, the creative 7 is manifested in the solar system in the form of 7 creative planets, including the radiant centre of the system. Each of the planets is one of the representatives of the 7 principles and builds its own part of the system's organ. And in turn, these 7 principles of the body of the system weave the body and all the shells of the earthly person. The Sun is in our solar system, the representative of the spiritual divine core of consciousness, which self-radiates potential opportunities rolled up in it. In its potential, the entire cosmic flow of love and life, refracted in a special prism of synthetic solar co-knowledge, and then realized in the life of the entire system, starting from the planetary orbits and ending with the smallest being located on the planets. Everything that lives within the system is the embodiment and diversity of the refraction of solar possibilities, is the realization and unfolding to the smallest detail of it, the Sun, the reserve of love and life in a specific, through the prism of its intelligent creativity. The Sun is the constant presence of God in our system. All formations of the spiritual world, all spirits, all ideas, and all forms are radiations of solar possibilities on the 4 planes of manifestation of its creativity, the carrier of which are the consciousnesses inhabiting these worlds. Just like the great divine, the potential of the 2nd principle radiates from itself the periphery of its influence, forming the common space of the system, the extreme boundary of which is the orbit of Saturn. Thus the orbit of Saturn, in contrast to the radiating centre, is a sphere of extreme absorption, that is, the ultimate objectification of subjective self-emission. Since the solar consciousness, with the spiritual poison shining brightly in it, is subjective, the consciousness that is locked in the orbit of Saturn is also subjective, and to the extent that it expresses the subjective possibilities of the Sun in the most differentiated and condensed objective forms. Saturn is a representative of the material principle, is the limit of the narrowing and differentiation of consciousness in space and time, and the particular forms in which the consciousness is broken are so tightly enclosed in the framework of materialization, so separated from each other that communication between them is impossible. The consciousnesses living on Saturn are doomed to constant loneliness. The range of their perception and activity is extremely limited, and each of them completely and in concrete materialized form expresses one particular of solar possibilities, but the expression of this particular in the objective world is brought to perfection. The iron law of causality floods these consciousnesses, which are completely identified with it and do not dream of any aspirations, goals and opportunities except for the realization of that particular link in the chain of causality that each of them represents. The creative potentials on Saturn are narrow and small. There is no self-consciousness in its forms, and therefore the element of personality as a microcosm is not expressed. Jupiter is a representative of the etheric principle, the prana principle. He manages the order and regularity of the distribution of the life force in all its aspects throughout the solar system. Jupiter, therefore, is the creator sculptor of life forms in our system, and all the planets are covered by this influence of his. The consciousnesses living on Jupiter are strongly identified with the form of their manifestation, but this form is not as narrow as on Saturn, and does not represent a particular link in the chain of causality. Consciousness living on Jupiter have knowledge and power of the cosmic ordinary law in both its manifestations, but only in the sphere of their special task. As a representative of the order of distribution of life force, Jupiter coordinates the hierarchical structure of the solar system and builds a hierarchical ladder for the consciousnesses developing in it. Therefore, Jupiter patronizes the establishment of a hierarchical order and regularity in the distribution of accumulated vital forces in any expression, that is, from spiritual to material wealth, on all the planets of the system. Mars is a representative of the impulsive hierarchical life. In the orbit of Mars, the psychic energy of the solar system is concentrated into foci of differently coloured psychic impulses called feelings on Earth. The consciousnesses on Mars are identified with these psychic impulses and are their representatives. All the forces of individualized spiritual, mental, and etheric vital energy are concentrated in these psychic foci. Therefore, the feelings in which these consciousnesses are embodied, neither in strength nor in intensity nor in range, can be compared to earthly feelings. Mars is a concentrator of all psychic energy on all planes of its manifestation into psychic multicolored conscious foci, and Mars therefore is a representative of the power of concentration, that is, establishing the centre of personal consciousnesses with the help of self-perception in the environment. Mars at the same time has a capacitor of psychic energy into powerful psychic charges of high energy. The Earth, or rather the Moon, is a representative of the lower manas, a small intellect or reason. The Earth is only the centre of a sphere, the periphery of which is the lunar orbit. Ethically, psychically and intellectually, the Earth is a product of the lunar sphere. It is a material condensation, which means that the Moon should not mean a small lunar ball describing only the outer orbit of the lunar sphere, but the entire sphere enclosed between the Earth and the material Moon, since etherically, psychically and mentally this sphere represents one whole. Therefore, the influence of the Moon on the Earth is so powerful, and the Earth is only a special case of the manifestation of the lunar sphere, condensing and concretely expressing all the possibilities contained in this area. And since the Moon is a representative of the lower manas, the influence of the lunar sphere on the Earth is mainly destructive. But under certain aspects of the material Moon, the phenomena of intuitive power increase wonderfully, because new psychic pictures and forces located in the lunar sphere materialize. The Earth and the Moon for the first time ignite a ray of self-consciousness of individual psychic cosmoses formed by Mars. That is, a personality appears on Earth for the first time as a microcosm reflecting the cosmic thought creation, feelings and will, expressed completely in the form of the spiritual core of consciousness, and therefore being an instrument of spiritualization and individualization of materiality, that is, the state of absorption of the subject by the object. On Earth, the subject and the object are at the stage of equilibrium. Therefore, the personal consciousness of the spiritual representative of humanity is manifested here for the first time, and this is associated with the manifestation of self-activity and responsibility, which must be developed in the earthly humanity, by the earthly humanity. Not blind submission to the law of authority, no matter how beautiful it may be, and no matter how natural such subordination may be, but a conscious attitude to this whole regularity, creative mastery of the process of realization, and conscious cooperation with the cosmic regularity. This is what earthly creatures are called upon to accomplish. Therefore, the Earth is a turning point from the irresponsible and blissfully lawful transmission of orders and impulses through the hierarchy, from top to bottom, to independent creative work associated with a constant struggle in the name of establishing and approving conscious personal focuses. Therefore, the direction of earthly creativity is not a top-down transfer for those who are on Earth, but the growth of consciousness from the bottom up, from the personal focus to the spiritual core, which should be embodied by the personality. Venus embodies the great manas, that is, the principle of the creative mind. The creative force of the solar system is the radiation of Venus. The thought images are created in it by the work of the consciousnesses embodied on Venus, of course taking into account the nature of the environment into which the thought images fall. The consciousnesses on Venus are quite individual, and the process of thought creation is the only one, but also quite sufficient tool for their manifestation. At the same time, being a representative of the mind, Venus manages the dynamics of polarization and the relationship of the poles in the solar system. That is why the manifestations of the polarization of love on Earth belong to Venus. The creativity of the mind reflects the truth of spiritual unity in an objective form. Therefore, the creativity of Venus establishes beauty and harmony of manifestations everywhere. The consciousnesses of beings on Venus relate to human consciousnesses in the same way that human consciousnesses relate to the consciousnesses of animals on Earth. However, in essence, Venus and Earth are very related to each other, since both are representatives of the same principle of intelligence in its two different aspects, higher and lower, creative and implementing. The humanity, Venus and Earth, should have been the closest collaborators, older and younger brothers, but the breakdown of the consciousness of earthly humanity made the task of the humanity of Venus difficult. To help the earthly humanity in the name of fulfilling its tasks, 7 great Venus consciousnesses were incarnated on earth, who found their servants among the earthly humanity. These 7 Kumaras are the elder brothers of humanity who have overcome the breakdown of consciousness, that is, the fall, and constitute the true white brotherhood on earth. Mercury is a representative of Buddhi, the principle of the soul, which directly perceives the spirit and reflects it in the game of its transformations. The consciousnesses living on Mercury live in a whole, unbreakable connection with all cosmic consciousnesses and therefore have God knowledge. They know the plasticity of all objective material and own it, reflecting the sparks of the spirit in it. They establish in the system the continuity of consciousness through all its transformations, that is, the true principle of immortality for all beings. They also establish the principle of brotherhood, that is, the deep connection of all souls and the unity of the spirit. They affirm the relativity of manifestations that have value only as expressions of the radiance of the spirit and the flow of life. These consciousnesses also establish the order of the flow of life and the sequence of its changes in the solar system. Managing each special stage of the manifestation of the flow of love and life, creatively radiated by the sun, all these consciousnesses build the building of the solar system, both in its general features and in its smallest details. According to the form of their consciousnesses and their task, the spirits of the great planets influence the life and construction of the worlds they create, the life and character of the beings inhabiting them, creating a connection of mutual understanding and cooperation in the entire planetary chain by such interpenetration. The signs of the fraternal planets are imprinted on each planet. They are also recorded on our land. The flow of the undifferentiated consciousness of the carrier of love and life, pouring out from the sun to the orbit of Saturn, then returns with already formed individual consciousnesses along the ascent steps, tabled along the way, organising all the objective material of the solar system, that is, its life, according to the precepts of love, according to the laws of thought creation. The signs of the previous stage are fixed on each planet in concrete or material form. The signs of the subsequent stages are reflected in the particular cases of these forms and in the psychic possibilities realised by the humanity of this planet. Thus, on our Earth, the achievements of the previous stages of its development, the stages of Saturn, Jupiter and Mars, are recorded as follows. Saturn created a material stronghold, the mineral kingdom. Jupiter created the guardians and converters of prana, the vegetable kingdom. Mars embodied psychic impulses in the animal kingdom. Humanity itself, in its form of existence, is under the influence of Venus, while its spiritual materials are created by Mercury, and the creative initiative in its general construction and in the manifestations of individual personalities belongs to the Sun. Already by this characteristic of the planets, their influence on the characters of their prince, the signs of their influence on humanity are also outlined. Human personalities are the developers of the details of the general human task. They are the performers of that filigree work of particular general construction, which is necessary for the harmony and completeness of the implementation of the entire general plan of the task to the smallest detail. Human personalities as such are created in harmony with their particular tasks and take from the material of the solar system what they need to fulfill, such, that is, they draw those planetary influences that are suitable for their special work. Therefore, psychic personalities, despite their microscopicity, bear the signs of the predominant tonality of a particular planetary influence. The Sun in human personalities gives a strongly expressed initiative, self-radiance, and non-need awareness with manifestations, that is, manifested mental domination over oneself, or self-control and natural domination over others. The Sun is imprinted in the spiritual life of a person by natural and joyful religiosity, in the mental life by synthetic thinking, in the psychic life by the mentioned self-affirmation, in the etheric psychic life by cheerfulness, which no one can ever break. The Sun gives a sense of self and self-awareness of the individual. Mercury instills understanding in the human heart and makes consciousness plastic, easily adaptable to other consciousnesses, a natural recognition of the unity of life. Spiritually, Mercury is reflected by the desire for self-transformation, that is, with a natural recognition of evolution. Mentally, Mercury gives recognition and combinatorial thinking, that is, the ability to create new syntheses from recognized parts. Psychically, Mercury helps in recognition and adaptability, which is expressed in shifting consciousnesses from one form to another, gives independence from conventions and prejudices, and also the management of patterns. Therefore, in the highest atmosphere of humanity, applied to the planes of lower manifestations, Mercury is often expressed in adventurism and cheating, but with a major shade, which can be sublimated by translation to higher planes. Etheric physical Mercury gives mobility, adaptability, and ease of life. Venus gives souls creativity, consciousness of beauty, and the intensity of striving for each other, harmonic poles in the name of the same creativity. Spiritually, Venus gives the search for truth through form, and creativity expresses it in form. Mentally, Venus gives mastery of the thought-creating process, that is logical deduction, and creates creative intelligences. Mentally, Venus creates types of artists, creators, and gives art the polarization of love. Venus creates a difference of potentials in the personality itself, expressed by the searching. Longing for the ideal comes from tension created by Venus. Etheric physical Venus creates harmony and beauty of forms with a slight hint of asymmetry as the beginning of the search for higher harmony. I'm just seeing how long this... Okay. Okay. The moon has three aspects of influence. The waxing moon gives individuals the desire for refinement, for the separation of the psyche from the material framework. That is, it contributes to the psychic phenomena of exteriorization in all planes of life. The full moon manages the law of polarization of processes, patronizes the incarnation of souls, that is, the process of conception and birth, as well as the process of implementing creativity into earthly material. But the idea of creativity does not depend on it at all. Therefore, it inclines to phantasmagoric and devoid of spiritual values, realizations of psychic material in artistic and other forms. The waning moon manages the process of decomposition of matter, that is, it acts destructively at the same time associatively. In addition, it causes an illegal process of materialization of negative entities seeking to touch the earth, and forcibly, that is, without the presence of subjective preparation, causes a partial exteriorization of the psyche of people subject to lunar influence. Spiritualism and mediumism should be included in the area of immediate influence. Spiritually, the moon causes anxiety, the search for an indefinite higher principle, and attracts the personalities subordinate to it to the solar personalities, the sense of spiritual life. Mentally, the moon manages the process of induction, that is, the search for higher syntheses on the basis for dissatisfaction with concrete thinking. Mentally, the moon will give passivity, instability, and good nature. Etheric, physical, gives phlegm due to the lack of phlegmaticness, due to the lack of expansive solar energy, and easily creates vampiric types that use the life force of others. Mars, spiritually, gives the ability to concentrate the spiritual tension of the environment and identify with other set ideals. This gives an extremely powerful force for the implementation of these ideals. Mentally, Mars bestows concentration of thinking, at the same time narrowing it so that it makes it impossible to merge with the general flow. Mars does not have oversight of the general plan, but it perfectly focuses on the particulars. Jupiter gives an awareness of the reliance on regularities, and therefore softens and facilitates responsibility. He also introduces the principle of hierarchy into consciousness, that is, the joyful recognition of the higher and caring for the lower. Jupiter supports the consciousness of a common chain of cooperation. Spiritually, Jupiter gives the ability to transmit spiritual influx from top to bottom with full trust and recognition of the highest spiritual authorities. Therefore, he is the patron of all existing churches and religions on earth, built on the principle of hierarchical and cosmic cooperation. Mentally, Jupiter gives an awareness of the regularity. His thinking is formal, figurative, and not inclined to abstraction. Individuals under the influence of Jupiter recognize someone else's regularity, but do not introduce it into the circle of their thinking. Psychically, Jupiter will give complacency, a tendency to patronage, unshakable devotion to once recognized authorities. It also gives the ability to friendship, that is, to systematic mental cooperation. Etheric, psychically, Jupiter, being the distributor of mental and vital force, is the main factor of health, that is, the order in the regular distribution of the body's forces. Saturn gives the ability to narrow consciousness in the process of concentrating spiritual tasks. He also closes the consciousness in the orbit of arrogance, builds partitions protecting it from the influence of others, and firmly fixes the will in the spiritual core, as in the centre of his personality. Spiritually, Saturn makes it possible to realize spiritual values within ourselves, can create the possibility of a personal example. Mercilessly dismissing everything that hinders, he gives our consciousness objective knowledge and an impartial assessment of the method of the path. Mentally, Saturn gives analytical thinking, creating a filigree accuracy of our consciousness. He also rewards us with the ability of criticism, that is, a clear examination of objectivity. Illegal criticism generates doubts, distortions, and then the influence of Saturn can be devastating. Saturn also inclines to economy, to a balance between the arrival and expenditure of vital forces. Saturn is prudent, and sometimes this prudence is expressed in avarice in all its manifestations, and avarice in absorbability. The legitimate absorption of Saturn is always justified by its self-creation. He always encourages the individual to give self-transformation to the world treasury of what is taken from it. The principle of duty is the principle of Saturn. With its influence, Saturn gives us a sense of loneliness, but it will give us the strength to endure this loneliness in order to forge our psychic core. Etheric physical Saturn will create endurance, inertia, melancholy, lack of cheerfulness. That is, it creates a type of psychic old men. As for the 3 planets following Saturn, they do not belong to the creative 7. This is the general characteristic of planetary influences. The details of capturing their laws and signs relate to the 7th principle of reading the natural symbolism of the book of nature. Thus, the creative 7 of secondary causality manifests itself everywhere in the universe. It creates life in the solar system, as well as on Earth and in all its kingdoms. These 7 creative forces, therefore, are imprinted everywhere in the symbols of true knowledge. The 7 keys of the worldview symbolize the 7 points of view on each thing. We can consider each phenomenon as a form consisting of planetary principles, physical, etheric, an expression of psychic life, an expression of the usefulness of existence for other forms. And each phenomenon can be viewed from 3 points of view of spiritual vision, as an expression of an idea, as a manifestation of the meaning of life, and as a manifestation of love. The 7th key reveals the very essence of things. The 7 candles of the sacred lamps denote these 7 creative forces, and the hierarchy of angels symbolises them. And these 7 principles are reflected in the symbolism and legends of the East, deeply imprinted in the popular consciousness. And every spiritual impulse given to humanity has 7 spectres of its manifestation. 7 mysterious Kumaras, spirits from Venus, who came to help humanity, create 7 initiatory schools and paths, 7 religions. And not only on Earth, but also in the sky. This 7 is in the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, in the 7 stars of each truly grouped constellation. For truly the number 7, representing the 3 fundamental principles of the world, reflected in the quaternary law of world dynamics, is the number that governs the life of the cosmos. The 3 higher principles rule over the 4 lower ones, and possess their elements. This is the basis of what people call the right of ownership, because without the possession of materials, it is impossible to show creative initiative and carry out spiritual construction in the form. Each consciousness, according to the size of its internal potential, determines the possession of its spiritual, mental, and physical potential. In this way, everyone is measured according to his measure, and in this way the scientist ultimately determines the size of his possession and his right to this possession. This is how God owns the world, and this is how each consciousness owns that part of the cosmic material that it needs for its conscious creativity. No one has and cannot have any other property right, and illegal sieges of subtle or condensed energies from the common treasury without the possibility of their creative processing entails severe retribution, terrible cosmic katastanzas, the consequences of which are quite difficult to predict. And thus ends the reading from Nina Roudnikova's 7th Arcanum, with a bit of help from Mailander and his 180th saying about purity. Let me just recap on that. Purity is innocence. Only one who can sacrifice himself lives in purity. Purity is innocence. Only one who can sacrifice himself lives in purity. Purity is innocence. Only one who can sacrifice himself lives in purity. Thank you to Nina and Alois Roudnikova and Mailander. And thank you for those who listened to the end.